just check. You can do that checks. And uh, once we invite all the participants, we will have to share our screen. We have prepared a PPT, so we will do that initially,
Is it,
and then
is my
sharing
screen
of
in
your
the
screen.
presentation mode visible?
Yes,
Yes.
visible, clear, perfect.
I will share that
So
slideshow.
just unshare. We'll be sharing our screen, and once we hand it over to you, then you can go ahead and sharing it. So Sham, let's let the
Okay, so we'll allow the
participants
participants.
enter the webinar. Yes, yes, and have the screen also shared. A very warm welcome to all our participants today. Thank you all for joining in. Hi Bhavna, Aditi, Bhaumik, Chetan, Divya, Mauli, Milind, Nimesh, Pulkit, Hiral, Shushti, Chetan, Vinay, thank you all for joining in. Good afternoon, Ayush. So, well, it's time and time to begin with our today's session. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In the venture capital business, many people think that a short pitch is 30 slides and a short business plan is 50 pages. That's how they are mistaken. The more slides and pages that you see to explain your business, the less likely you will succeed. Truly, the best pitches and plans require nothing more than one page or a picture to explain them. Do you recognize this picture? Well, why and how to use visual thinking in your business? Let's hear it from our expert today. HR Association of India welcomes you all to the 2021 Dialogue Masterclass series on the topic The Art of Visual Thinking. All participants to visit the link and details posted in the chat window. I request all the participants to kindly follow the webinar guidelines mentioned below. It would be great to have all the participants' feedback. We will be running a poll before the Q&A session. Request all participants to kindly give your feedback on the session. I now take the privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Mr. Tanmay Vora, author and illustrator, QAspire, and head of operations, QMetry India Private Limited. Mr. Tanmay is a business leader and a performance improvement specialist who loves to work at the crossroad of people, processes, and change leadership. With over 2 decades of experience in diverse and global environments, he pursues organizational, operational, and leadership excellence to deliver business value. He started his career in software development and stint into project and program management. Software quality and corporate quality led him to organizational leadership roles. Last served on the board of Vastware India Operations, where he led 400 people, one third of Vastware's global strength, as country head and director. He is also known for his amazing sketch notes. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. Details for the same are mentioned in the chat window. The link for the same has been mentioned in the chat window. I now hand over the platform to Mr. Tanmay Vora. Over to you, Tanmay.
Thank you so much, Peter, for having me over once again in a span of about 3 months. I'm excited to be here and speaking to such a wonderful community of leaders, professionals, and learners. I'm thrilled to be here to start with. Let's dive into the topic of visual thinking, and please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, all right. And is my voice really clear?
Yes, your voice is clear.
All right. So you know, I would like to start with this thought that when we were kids, when we did not know the language, how did we make sense of the world? We made sense of the world primarily through what we saw, because we couldn't speak. We did not know what gestures would mean what. We learned everything by seeing, and therefore our eyes are our window to the world, and our eyes are also the window to our own selves. You look at somebody in the eye, and you will know what kind of a person that is, and that is at the heart of that's the basis of this entire discussion today, which is visual thinking. Visual is what you can see. um, so let's jump into the conversation, but first of all, let me um, let me share with you some of the sketch notes that I've done over the years. And if you see these sketch notes, these are handwritten sketch notes. What are sketch notes? They are basically a combination of sketch and notes, right? So when you're taking notes, when you're attending a conference or attending a YouTube video, when you're seeing, you're constantly taking notes. What I do is I take those notes, but I add some visuals, hand-drawn visuals into it. This enables me to learn very immersively. This enables me to learn deeply. And for me, this is my passion project. I combine these 2 decades of business leadership experience with the power of visual thinking to illuminate complex ideas, to facilitate groups of people who are solving interesting problems, and also facilitate groups for collective sense making using some of these powerful visual tools. Um, if I go further, these are the kind of sketch notes that I do. So you can see it on this screen, and you can see it here as well. Um, this sketch note on the left, Leadership in VUCA World, is almost a 1,000-word article that I wrote for a People Matters magazine. And then I thought it will be hard for most people to read a 1,000-word article, but let me instead create a sketch note that enables that you have cognition in just one sheet of paper. Similarly, the one on the right is this was done 5 years back, mindset shifts in organizational transformation, and this has been the most viral, most shared sketch note across internet, and on LinkedIn and other places. So what qualifies me to also talk to you about visual thinking is that my visual work has been featured so far on platforms like Forbes, World Economic Forum, uh, IEEE, Huffington Post, and Harvard Business Review Ascent, which is the India edition of Harvard Business Review. I have books. I have illustrated ideas, complex ideas in books that were in French. There was a Wall Street Journal bestseller called Growth IQ, which I illustrated, where I illustrated about 45 case studies for an author called Tiffany Boa. She's the chief innovation evangelist at Salesforce.com. And this book became a Wall Street Journal bestseller, which was like a really high point in my sketchnoting journey. Apart from that, I have also helped multiple events and organizations like Mahindra Partners, Molecular Partners, a Swiss pharma company. I recently worked with Roche Diagnostics, which is another very big diagnostic company. Apart from these, I've done a Bamboo HR Elevate Summit visualization for this conference in US. My sketch notes have been used in numerous conferences, TED Talks, organizations, and the couple of pictures that you see down there are from the European Commission conference, where they ended up using some of my sketch notes. So this is a little bit of a background on what makes me, uh, eligible for talking to you about visual thinking to start with. Now let's dive into the topic. And now, before we start the topic, I want to urge all the participants to have a paper and pen ready with you, because halfway past this session, I will expect that you will draw something, and you will have to draw along if you want to really learn the art of sketchnoting. So please keep your paper and pen ready. Nothing fancy. It could be a piece of couple of pieces of paper. It could be a notebook. It could be a pencil. It could be a normal black roller pen. But just keep some drawing and something where you can write on ready with you. Now let's get into the topic. So the challenge of our times is that we live in a world of information overload, right? So about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is produced every day. And this is an old research by IBM. So if I look at it today, it might be probably 5 quintillion bytes of data that is produced every day. We consume a lot. We are always on mobile, skimming through a lot of information. So we are seeing a lot, but we are absorbing very little. If you really see how we behave on internet, we start reading something, doesn't interest, we just skip it, right? We go next. And then tools like Facebook, Twitter, etc. have made us very used to the feeds that are bottomless. So if you keep scrolling, things will keep coming, and therefore it's just a very passing observation that we do without absorbing really too much. And in that sort of environment, information overload can make us busy without learning anything in return. Our customers are also dealing with the same problem. They have too much information and their attention span is too small. And there was one research that said that our attention span is less than the attention span of a goldfish, which is 7 to 8 seconds. And our attention span is even less than that, which means that we are not able to attend to one thing for more than 7 or 8 seconds. And therefore, content writers are told that if you want to write a great copy or if you want to write a great content, write in a way that first 5 seconds really hooks people, and then there's more likelihood of they reading further. Similarly, businesses, right? If you look at it, if you look at corporate websites, and if you look at process diagrams, and if you look at the process material within the company, if you look at all the policies and SOPs and stuff like that, businesses are absolutely textual and abstract. Uh, it if you have to understand a certain rule in the business, you have to go through pages and pages and pages of documentation. And I've implemented some of these processes in businesses, so I know how lengthy these processes really could be. So what we need today is a simpler way for sense making, strategizing, connecting, communicating, problem solving, ideating, innovating, and learning in general, right? Now, this is the problem statement that we are trying to address through visual thinking, but this is just one part of the problem. Now, if I ask you, what do you see? If I've drawn a little diagram in the bottom, could you write in the chat, what do you see here? It is a tree, right? Now, if you look at this tree, I can draw a single line and just a little bit of a cloud on top of it, just color it green, and not even color it completely, but just draw some green lines, and you will feel that this is a tree. Next level, I can go down and draw a little more details, right? And you will see that this is a bigger tree. I go further down and I add some branches, and I add some more clouds to it, draw a couple of birds on top of it, and you immediately see that, yeah, this is a tree. Now, it does not matter how a tree really looks, but what matters is what image your brain creates when you see this. When you see this, your brain creates an image, right? And that image is a visual that your brain has been creating ever since you were born. So this creates a whole new language of symbols and visual metaphors that our brain uses to represent things and emotions. So for example, if there is a door where there is an arrow, you know that this is an exit door or this is an entry door. You just look at the sign without any text and you see that, okay, this is where I need to go if I want to exit the airport, for example. And therefore, this is the visual metaphor that your brain creates. And now our brain understands a completely different language than what we speak. We speak in words, we speak in text. However, our brain understands visuals. Let me further go and say that we draw all the time with our visual brain. Imagine that you're reading a novel that describes a beautiful scene, somewhere in the snowy mountains. There's a nice, a nice looking porch where somebody's sitting and observing the whole nature, and it's all written in words, your brain starts to create that imagery in your mind, pretty much like this. So they say that our brain, when you read, it visualizes everything inside. So there's almost like a movie going on in your head when you are reading, and that is what makes reading novels such a powerful thing. Yeah. And I'm sure when you are for those of you who are avid readers, you would relate with this all the more, that when you read, the whole scene plays in your mind, and therefore your mind is constantly visualizing. Visual thinking, therefore, is a way to use visuals to organize your thoughts, to connect ideas and see intersections between the ideas, to synthesize information, to improve your ability to think, because when you write down, you're putting or you're mapping your thought process on a piece of paper, and it enables you to think better. It also enables you to communicate better. And it turns out that our communication becomes, when it becomes visual, when it involves people, our communication becomes sharper, and it becomes more crisp, and it becomes something that is easy to understand, irrespective of the language barriers, which means that, visual language is the language that we all understand, irrespective of our spoken language preferences, right? So we understand the visuals pretty much the same way. If I ask you to close your eyes and think of an elephant, and the picture that comes into your mind is exactly the same picture that comes to the mind, if I ask the same question to, let's say, a Norwegian or a Finn or a German or a Brit, right? We There's no difference in that visual. We may describe that elephant differently in different languages, but the image, the visual metaphor of that elephant is exactly the same for all of us, irrespective of language. Therefore, I think drawing, we were taught, is an art. So if you can draw, you are an artist. If you can paint, you are an artist. But I think drawing is not art. Drawing is a way of thinking clearly. Remember when you were a kid, and when you did not know, when, let's say, you were 2 years old and you didn't know language, what did you do when you were given a paper and a pencil? What did we do? We, on those blank papers, we created squiggles, and we drew lines, and we started drawing before we started writing. And therefore, drawing was given to us as a tool, as a way to think clearly. However, our education educated us out of drawing. They said, if you want to succeed, you have to be able to write long sentences and long paragraphs, and you have to be able to write legibly, and you need to be able to speak legibly and clearly. However, we were programmed out of drawing. What happens when we draw is that drawing enables us to simplify the complex. Visual metaphors allows our brain to fill the gaps. Let's say you're reading a 1,000-word article. There is a great idea on the top, there is a great idea in the center, and there is a great idea in the bottom. It's very hard otherwise, if it's only textual, to connect those three ideas. But when you draw, you are actually connecting ideas, you are actually synthesizing information, you're learning very immersively. When you're writing by hand, you're learning very immersively. It helps in sense making. It eases comprehension, clarity, and research says that we remember 10% of what we read, we remember 35% of what we see, but we remember about 65% of what we read and see, which means what you're seeing on the right hand side of your screen is Sketchnote, and this has a far better memory recall than just reading or than just seeing anything, right? And then it's easy to communicate in pictures. It's easy to share in pictures, because these days we are living in a visual world. Instagram and Pinterest and all that, and obviously WhatsApp and other messengers, you can simply consume a visual. If it connects with you, you can share it with people. It's very easy to share overall. um, Therefore, I think we are wired to think visually. We discussed this before, that as kids we thought visually before we started thinking in words and in text. If you see what happens to your brain when and there's a science behind this visual thinking, is that 90% of the information that enters our brain is non-verbal. Let's say you meet a new person. The first thing you notice is the outlook. The first thing you notice when they speak is the tone of the voice. the first thing you see is how they are overall structured before you start paying attention to what they're saying. And therefore 90% of what you are learning today is happening non-verbally. 90% is a conservative estimate, it could be more. When you process a visual, about 50% of your brain is involved in visual processing. In a day, we are seeing so many things, and our brain processes these visuals 60,000 times faster than text, which means that if you're reading a book, it takes 60,000 times more effort than just seeing a visual. And that explains why these visuals are viral. So when some of my sketch notes are shared on LinkedIn and other places, there was a recent sketch note that was shared and it got something like 20,000 likes, and it got more than a thousand comments. What brought so many people to a common platform like that was the power of visual. That information was presented in a visual form. Visual triggers emotions, and it stimulates other areas of brain. Now sometimes you say mentoring, right? You think of something, you think mentoring is about helping somebody, but when you see mentoring in action, that somebody who has climbed a certain mountain is helping somebody else, is pulling somebody else up to come up to the peak of the mountain, it sort of raises a different sort of emotion in your mind. By the way, our brain has the same area that processes the emotions. That same area processes visuals as well, which is why when you see movies, you are moved to tears sometimes, because when you're seeing that visual, we also know that movies are not real, but that scene that you see, right, moves you into tears because it's a visual information, and your brain processes it and creates some emotions, and those emotions then start impacting you. 65% we remember 65% of what we read and see, and 70% of your sensory receptors are in your eyes. And therefore we are, our biology is wired for us to think visually. Visuals are important because they are social objects of conversation and change. And I have done a lot of visuals for companies where I've done visual notes for their cafeteria, for example. And the idea was that how do we put our values in the cafeteria area so that when people come and grab a cup of coffee and look at that new visual, they start talking about it. It's a social object of conversation. When you see a visual, you start talking about it. And when you start talking about it, there is more awareness, and then more change that is likely to happen when you see visuals. So visuals are social objects of conversation and change. Drawing and coloring in general puts us in a meditative state. It puts us in flow state, and all our anxieties and worries actually melt down when you are actually engaged in the process of drawing and coloring. Writing by hand increases comprehension, it improves learning. It also creates a neural pathway for possibility. So therefore, motivational speakers tell you to write your goals, right? Why do they ask you to write your goals? Because when you write, it creates a pathway into your brain, and it's more likely to then happen even subconsciously. And then if you're selling, or if you're in marketing, or if you're in sales, or if you're in HR, or if you are dealing with people and you have to sell your ideas, now you know that if there is other person sitting in front of you, then he's more likely to process visual information faster than textual information. And therefore, if you talk to them in that language, it you're improving your likelihood of selling or convincing or influencing the other person by about 15x, in that sense. So we are wired to think visually, and we can leverage visual thinking to learn fast, to communicate better, to connect with others more meaningfully. Visual thinking is all about seeing, imagining, and then putting what you see and imagine into a form of a picture. There are some sketches that have changed the world. Let's look at some of them. This is Alexander Graham Bell's first concept of telephone. He didn't invent telephone, just as a matter of scientific experimentation. He invented telephone. Before he invented it, he created a concept diagram of how it would work. This was the sketch from Alexander Graham Bell that changed, how we communicate with each other. Similarly, this is a sketch that was drawn by the founder of Southwest Airlines. His name is Herb Kelleher, and he ran an airline business that went bust. and he was very frustrated. So he goes to he goes to a bar to have a drink with his friend, and then his friend gives him an idea that what about how do we what about starting an airline that just connects um, these three cities in Texas, for example. And he just created this on a paper napkin. He drew Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, and says, what if we just connect just these three things? And that was how America's most profitable airline, Southwest Airlines, was born. More so, Jack Dorsey, who founded Twitter, this was his original idea, right? So he says, what are you doing right now? And then you can just set that status. And it had some buttons like in the bed and going to park. So if you see, Twitter as it is today started from a very rough sketch uh, on a piece of paper. So this is what visual thinking does to your brain. It allows you to ideate and innovate in a way that nobody else has. I lived for 6 years in Chandigarh before recently moving back to Ahmedabad. And Chandigarh is India's first planned city, and it's called City Beautiful. But and it was designed by the same guy, Lee Corbusier, who I think designed some of the some of the buildings in Ahmedabad as well. So Lee Corbusier, when he was conceptualizing the city, it was surrounded by Shivalik mountains. He created these drawings and envisioned the whole city before he designed it on the paper, and before that uh, that actually became a city, in 1960, 1962. He also created the drawing of how the sectors will look like, etc., all on a piece of paper first before he created that city. And I think this is the height of visual thinking, that somebody who did not have access to AutoCAD and those fancy software was able to just take a piece of paper and pen and start drawing his vision out on a piece of paper, and then that led to the design of the city called Chandigarh. And this is also the basis of how Gandhinagar in Gujarat was also conceptualized. So if you look at, this is the power of visual thinking in business. And now before we get to drawing, this is the last segment. And what kind of visuals do you often see in business? If I were to ask that question, what kind of visuals do we see in business? Maybe you can write down in the chat box as to what kind of visuals do we see in business. I mean, yeah. So pie charts, we see a lot of graphs and charts. We sometimes even do storyboarding in marketing. We draw visual processes. We draw activity diagrams for processes. Balance scorecards, absolutely. So there's a lot of different ways that we use visual thinking in business already today. However, most of this thinking is because it is extremely mechanical or driven by geometrical shapes. It becomes very impersonal. It becomes a little bit boring. And again, most of these graphics are computer generated, and therefore it creates a different kind of problem for us. That it Okay, can you still hear me? Because I think I get a message that I'm muted.
Yeah, we can hear you, Tanmay.
All right. So these are all the different kinds of visuals that you see in the process. And I remember an experience from my early career where I was trying to sell services to a customer in Finland. And this was a very large uh, uh, you know telecommunications company in Finland back in 2008. I was in front of them. I was trying to sell them something, and there was a fancy presentation going on which I was showing them. And the person I was targeting, who he was the VP of the infrastructure and IT, and he was literally, he closed his eyes and he was sleeping, which means that all I was presenting was basically going over the head, or he was not attending to it, it was very frustrating for me to see that I'm presenting my ideas to a VP of IT, and he's closing his eyes and he doesn't want to look at what I'm showing it to him, right? And then at that moment, I didn't know what happened, and I stopped the presentation. I got up, grabbed a marker pen, and started whiteboarding what I was trying to tell him. Now, the moment I stood up and went to the whiteboard and started drawing that concept diagram of how the software development process should really look like, and immediately he opens his eyes, gets up and starts paying attention. So much that he gets up from his seat, grabs a red marker pen and starts correcting, whatever I was drawing. And he said, okay, this is how we do it, and this is where there is a gap, and so on. And it led to an interactive dialogue, at the end of which he was convinced that he would want to give some projects to us. Now, this is the power of visual thinking, that if I was showing him a presentation, he was sleeping. But the moment I got up and started whiteboarding things, it moved him so much that he got up and started participating in it himself. So that is a really powerful way of doing it. We've seen mind mapping, we've seen project management charts, and so on. So there's a storytelling that we do in marketing. We take the hero's journey, where there's a hero that goes through, there's a nice character that is comfortable in a setting, and then there is an inciting incident that happens. The hero goes to the struggle, there is a crisis, then there is a climax, and then from there is a resolution, and then this hero comes back completely transformed and changed. And if you can look at your organization as a hero and say, how does the organization navigate this uncertainty that we are facing now to emerge victorious and emerge transformed? And that entire journey you can plot through a visual. Similarly, if you want to do a deep research on a subject and identify different facets of, you want to do critical thinking, then most critical thinkers use a lot of mind mapping, and mind map enables you to connect ideas and in a branched fashion, right? um, Similarly, I did a project for a company in Finland, where they were defining their strategy for entire 3 years a period, and they basically got me into that room as a visual facilitator. And what I did was I created that entire story, where the organization was the hero, and it goes through where is the organization, what is the history of the organization, where are we today, what challenges are facing us in terms of AI, machine learning, etc. How do we align our products and solve and then overcome these challenges, and how do we emerge victorious? And for that, what are those 4 focus areas that we need to focus on, and what are those 3 things in each focus area that we need to focus on? And at the end of the day, there was no strategy document, there was no business plan, there was nothing. There was just a simple visual that they printed about 1800 copies of that visual and pasted it in every single desk and every single common place, so that people are reminded of where they come from, what are they facing, where are they going, what do they need to do to be able to go there, right? And that is how the visual thinking really works. So we have seen project management, we've seen Kanban boards, we have seen user experience and user interface people doing a lot of wireframing to define their product specifications as well, because they want to see it first before they really build it. um, and similarly, we have planning templates, we have values. So an organization that I worked with had 4 values, and this is how we represented those values. So we're saying inspire and be inspired, or strive for excellence, or lead the way, or drive customer success, and that we are together in this whole journey and so on. So it's a very simple visual, but sort of talks to you really in a different way than just a textual document. Here are some more templates. There was this visual on the left was I created this for a trust in UK. And so you can see that their strategic intention is that rising sun that they want to get to. There are a couple of pathways to it, which are basically the streams that they worked on. What did they do in those streams, and how did they do it, right? And so this is a very simple visual template. Now, typically they can write a 500-word description of what they did, in their project report, or they can simply draw this and basically put it for everybody to see. Similarly, there are visual action plan templates in terms of how is it going, what is our brainstorming area. For example, it could be, how do we improve the recruitment, how is it going, then what's working, what are the gaps, what should we focus on, 3 things, and then what are actions that needs to be taken, who will take those actions, and by when. If this is just a simple 1-page template, it is visual, it demonstrates a flow, it demonstrates that at the end of when we do all of this, then we will emerge out victorious. It shows all of that in a simple format that you can use. It's a simple visual template that you can even draw this on a whiteboard. You don't need to sort of really go through the whole process. Now you will say that all this is great, Tanmay, but I can't draw. I mean, I've never drawn anything after my schooling, for example, or the only way when I need to draw something, I go to smart art in PowerPoint, and I use those ready-made templates. Drawing was never my thing in the school. I barely crossed my passing marks in drawing, and so on and so forth. My handwriting is handwriting is not very legible, and so on. So there are 100 excuses that you could give to yourself and say that, hey, I can't draw, sorry. But I think that anyone who can write preliminary, anyone who can write can draw. We human beings have been drawing for more than 40,000 years now. And if you look at some of the ancient drawings on the walls and the stones and stuff like that, drawing is the most ancient technology that we've used to transfer wisdom and communicate our ideas. When we imagine or envision, then we are already creating some images in our mind. It's only a matter of then putting those images in a piece of paper, not because you want to communicate it to the world, but just because you understand it better. And if you go back to the example of the tree, you don't have to draw a proper tree with all the branches and stuff like that. You can just draw a single line and a cloud above it, color it green, and for you, that's tree, right? So your mind associates that image with the tree, and that's all that is important. It's not important that you draw a proper tree with all the branches and leaves and shade it properly and stuff like that. That's not important. uh, I give example of kids. When we are kids, we draw random squiggles and shapes before we start to learn the alphabet. So let's get past all those excuses and start drawing. So are you guys all ready to put your paper pen to the paper and start drawing? You can write what you want to in chat box. I mean, I'm watching it. But are we guys ready to put your pen to the paper? Wonderful. Okay. I wanted one yes to go forward, and I sort of got it. Okay. So let's move past. Um, First, let's draw a dot, because nobody can say that they cannot draw a dot, right? So first we draw a dot, and then we take that dot for a walk, and that becomes a line. You give a certain direction to that walk, and that becomes an arrow. You walk around and it becomes a circle, square, triangle, and a blob. These are extremely basic shapes that you can use to think visually. And I'm assuming here that you all will draw along as we go through the remaining slides. And at some point, if you want, I will also share how you can, if you want to sort of share your drawing, please feel free to do that sharing on whatever is the platform of your choice. You can send an email out to me with your drawings, whatever, however way you want to share those with me. I would love to see what you come up with when you draw along with me. Now, using these basic shapes, what we can do is really awesome. So we can use this. For example, we say that we want to create a differentiation, and most of the innovation really happens at the intersection of two domains, right? If you look at Apple, they brought telephony and camera together. They brought telephony and music players together, and so on. So they basically created these multiple intersections of absolute domains to create innovation in the iPhone. And therefore, you can just draw two circles and say A, B, bring the circles together and see if there is an intersection. And that intersection could be your differentiation area. Similarly, you're writing something and you want to focus or emphasize on something. You can write that word, highlight the word using a simple circle around it. Now that's also visual thinking, because it directs your eye to focus on that word, right? You can simply draw a triangle and a circle above it, add a couple of dots there to create the eyes, and then you can actually, put arms and limbs around it, and what you have is a stick figure. Let's go further and draw a circle. Add very simple details: a standing line, a sleeping line, two dots, and what you get is a face. Similarly, if you draw a rectangle, draw a circle above it, add those basic details to the face, and what you have is a stick figure. This isn't complex, isn't it? This is really, really easy to do. Anybody can do it. If you don't want to draw this complex stick figure that I just showed, you can actually draw a straight line and simply draw a man or a figure, a human figure with lines. This is a very simple stick figure. And as you can see, now with this stick figure, you can actually make that person run. You can make that person walk. You can make that person climb a stair. You can make that person hold a flag. You can do everything just by drawing a few lines. And this, for visual thinking, you don't need to really go too much into the technical details of how a person looks like. Because when you see this figure, you know this is about someone. This is about a person. This is about a human being. Simple drawings like this can enable you to communicate emotions as well. The whole emoticon revolution has happened in how we communicate. It is based on this very simple, um, emotions. Draw a few of these if you can along. This will help you to reconnect yourself with drawing and realize that drawing as a way of thinking is not very complex. Again, you can use the circles to draw the central idea in this in the middle, and then draw the arrows going out of that circle, create additional circles or branches, and write down additional thoughts. So you can say, how do we improve our recruitments? Okay, number one we need to do is we need to improve our employer branding. Number two, we need to we need to focus on our sourcing strategy. We need to focus on employee experience during the interview process, and so on and so forth, right? And in 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes of that brainstorming, you have a model that you can now implement for improving your recruitment process, or improving your organization's culture for that matter, or solving any other problems that you want to solve, whether it is in engineering, HR, IT, whatever. Now, if we look at these emotions as a way to communicate what we feel, we can use. And then here you see that these basic shapes or stick figures that I have drawn, they don't even have facial expressions. It's just a circle, and I have not drawn eyes. There's no nose, there is no face, there's no mouth, nothing. Still, when you see that image, you feel like, yes, this person is joyful, versus this person is telling you that he's a winner, or this person is running, or this person is really confident. Similarly, you can draw these kind of stick figures using very simple shapes, adding some more details. For example, if you want to show that the person that you've drawn is a girl, you can draw a very simple two strands of hair to say that this is a girl, and so on. So you can draw star people, you can draw triangle people, you can also draw stick figures as well. What next? We draw basic shapes because you're talking about idea. You've drawn a circle and you have added an idea into it. Now you can connect the ideas using arrows. Arrows could be in any form, but most simple arrow is a line and a couple of lines at the end to represent the direction. But it could be a shaded arrow, it could be a graded arrow, it could be a random arrow that you draw. If you're drawing a process, you can actually draw process steps in arrows as well. If you want to title your thoughts, you can basically draw very simple banners wherein you draw a rectangle and you draw a title like this. You can add variation to the title by making it slightly circular, or you can make it something that is in form of a wave. You can draw that title as well. Now once we are through with these basic shapes, let me give you 2 minutes to draw a visual metaphor for project, for objective, and for team. This means you close your eyes and say, if you had to tell somebody about project without saying project, How will you say it? What visual language will you use to communicate project? What visual metaphor will you use to demonstrate the objective? What visual metaphor will you use to represent a team? So you have 2 minutes and you can draw along. And then I will also show my interpretation of how I would interpret project, objective, and a team. I wish we were in a closed room where I could see all of you drawing. That would have been fun. But I would like to see, I would still like to see what you draw. If you want to share it with me, you can share it on Twitter and tag me on Twitter and Instagram. You can share it me on LinkedIn as well, where my ID is Vora, or you can drop me a small note at my email address. Um, feel free to share your drawings on any of these platforms. Okay, if we are ready, I can go further and see that this is how I would represent project, objective, and a team. And these are very simple metaphors, right? Project could be four puzzle pieces, which is scope, time, cost, and quality. Project could be a sequence of activities that enables you to uh, get uh, get to a certain destination. Project could be multiple parts of scope, time, cost, and quality, rotating wheels in tandem. Objective could be a simple road that leads you to the stars. It could be a target, it could be a dartboard, it could be anything. A team could be a simply a representation of people together. It could be people holding hands. Team could be a visual of people helping each other step up. And you can draw maybe 10 more visual metaphors of how to represent project, objective, and team. Now you see, this is visual language. This is the language that our mind understands more than the word project. When you say project, our mind anyway creates some of these visuals in the mind. So our goal is to build the visual library of symbols and icons that can represent different ideas. And once that library or that visual vocabulary is created, then it's easy for anybody to draw. Again, we'll take one more exercise. Let's draw these four concepts. Now, these are concepts: confusion, idea, increase, and conflict. How would you describe these words? I'll give you 2 more minutes to draw these. How would you draw confusion? How would you draw idea? How would you draw increase? And how would you draw conflict? So it's fascinating to see some of you drawing with your videos on. That's really good. Okay, let's see how I would represent these concepts. So confusion could be just a random squiggle. A complex intermingling of a thread is what we call confusion. Confusion could be a person who is just wondering, not knowing what to do. There are a lot of question marks around his head. That could be confusion. Idea could be a light bulb, or a light bulb that pops out of a person's head, or a light bulb that is a result of shared thinking between two people. Now, if you see these two people, they're absolutely abstract in terms of how I have represented them. But when you look at it, you know that you're talking about people. If you look at increase, a simple arrow that points upward is enough for us to tell that there is an increasing trend. You can add more details by having a bar chart, with an arrow going up. When you look at conflict, uh, two arrows in opposite direction is a sign of conflict. Similarly, I have drawn two people, and when they are communicating with each other, there is no agreement between the two, and that could mean that is just a small conversation box with a strike off on it, and that's like they're not agreeing on something, and that's conflict. So you get the point of visual thinking, that you can represent even the most complex, even the most abstract of concepts using very, very simple visuals. And therefore, visual thinking is not about art. Your goal here is to not become an artist. Your goal is to not become Leonardo da Vinci, for example, or MF Hussein. Your goal is to just clarify your thinking to yourself first and then to the others. So very simple way of drawing a sketch note or putting your ideas in form of a sketch note is to put a title on the top, and please draw along if you want to. You can put a title at the top. There are three ideas that you write down, leaving some space for some visual metaphors. You say idea one, idea two, and idea three, and write down a couple of lines about each idea, and then draw a visual metaphor to represent that idea. This is as simple as it can get from the perspective of creating the sketch note. This is as simple as it can get. So you just have to organize your thoughts in some form of visual template. And if I have to give an example of how this works in practice, you can say that, show me an example of how you created a sketch note using this sort of framework. I would say that I created this sketch note, again went viral on social media. And it was very simple. We said leaders need three kind of focus. They need an inner focus, which is primarily self-awareness in terms of who they are and what do they stand for, and ability to sort of have emotional control over themselves. They need other focus, which is the outward focus about others, ability to empathize with others, work in a team, and that other orientation is at the heart of being able to be a good team player. And then they need an outer focus, which is more systemic focus, so in terms of what context are they operating, what are the constraints, and what are the challenges, what what kind of forces are at play when they are operating within their team and outside their team. And this could be, for example, the CEO has to know what his or her own strengths are. A CEO has to know what who all does he or she work with, and they also need to understand what environment they work in. And if you see very simple visual metaphors, inner focus is represented by a brain and a heart, and understanding of the brain and the heart. The other focus is represented by very simple visual metaphor of one person connected to two other people in a dotted line. And then outer focus is that a person in the middle of that image is operating in a mesh of connected dots, and knowing what those dots are is very important. And then I'm offering some suggestions on how to improve them, and those suggestions are also incorporated: how to improve the inner focus, how to improve the outer focus, how to improve the other focus. And if you look at this is the simplest. Now this is originally a Harvard Business Review article written by Daniel Goleman, who is the emotional intelligence guru. And he wrote 1,200 word article on Harvard Business Review. And this is the gist of that article. And even he, wrote back to me saying that I never thought that my ideas could be represented in this way. And again, if you see, there is no heroic here. There is no art here. It's purely handwritten notes combined with some visuals. And that's what makes it really, really powerful. So the key questions that I want us to reflect on today is: how are you currently leveraging visuals in your strategy? How can you integrate visual approach in how you communicate with your customers and with your people? How can you provide visual tools for people to collaborate better, solve interesting problems, and find intersections between the ideas where you can actually innovate? And how can you use visual thinking for your own learning, for your own cognitive benefits in terms of learning immersively and learning deeply? With those questions, I would like to close the session and initiate the round of question and answers. By the way, what you see on the screen is my Sketchnote selfie. Everybody has taken a selfie on their mobile phone at least once. So I decided that I will take my own selfie with respect to my my visual thinking, and try to demonstrate my journey with a sketch note about myself. And I call this a sketch note selfie. So it talks about what's my mission, where do I work, what do I do, uh, what books I have written, my blog as well. When did I start Sketchnotes? What are my tools for Sketchnotes? I use an iPad Pro with Apple Pencil now, but about 70% of all my work has been done on with a normal pen and paper. I use a tool called Procreate on iPad which includes a lot of brushes and pens and stuff like that. I've used a lot of paper and fine liner pens. And apart from that, I also use a lot of left and right brain in equal proportions, so logic and creativity in equal proportion to create these sketch notes. And my tips for anything, for achieving anything in life, is to learn passionately, to put that learning to good use, to share generously with others, and be the change that you really wish to see in the world. Because I think we are too focused on destinations, but I believe that journey itself is the destination, and every milestone you cross is just a milestone. It just comes and goes. But journey continues, and journey matters a lot. And every step along the journey, however small or big, really counts. So we can now open this forum for questions. I hope I would have answered some of the questions that you have asked already before. But if there are more questions, I'm happy to discuss those. You
So
can
before
either
we
write
finish,
your question in the chat, or or maybe Peter can ask
yeah.
the questions on behalf of the audience.
Thank you, Tanmay. So before we move into the Q&A session, we will be initiating a poll. Request all participants to kindly share your feedback on our today's session. While you are doing so, we would also request you to kindly share your questions regarding our today's session in the chat box. Once again, I thank all our participants for joining us today. We have received a lot of inquiry about the e-certificate offered by HRAI. You all can claim your certificate by sharing your details to the email ID provided on your screen. We will email the e-certificates to you based on the details we receive. So Tanmay, we have received one question. So while the participants are sharing their feedback, um, what are visual thinking strategies? Any kind of strategies that could be aligned towards this entire process of visual thinking?
So as I said, the first strategy is to draw more. Simply start drawing, and not hold yourself back, saying that my handwriting is not good, or how will others judge me. I think the lot of strategy is about taking that first step towards that direction. And the second strategy would be to share what you learn, because I think that we sometimes we do a lot of stuff, and we make things and then we don't share it with the world, thinking that we will be judged. I think that world is full of like-minded people. If we just share, you will get and in fact, if I outline my own journey, I started doing sketchnotes in 2015, later part of 2015, and I created a very rough sketch that I shared on social media. And I thought everybody will say that this is a really crappy piece of drawing. But there was one person named Abhijit Bhadur. He's a dear friend of mine. He was the chief learning officer of Wipro, and he said, "Excellent work, Tanmay. This is great." And that promoted my enthusiasm for it. I created a second one which was slightly better than the first one. Then I created the third one which was even better than the second one, and so on. So every single step, I did not stop just because my sketch notes were rough. or unfinished. I think what I still emphasize is it's not about the art, it's about the ideas. And if you're able to share ideas to the world, the format really doesn't matter. What matters is the power of idea and what you're trying to share or what you're trying to learn on your own. So that would be the strategy. I think there is a lot of material that is available out there, but if you want to start with the journey of visual thinking, I would recommend a book called Draw to Win by Dan Rome. It's a fantastic book that I have referred earlier in the cycle. There's also one more book called the Sketchnote Handbook by Mike Rohde, Mike Rohde, Mike Rohde, that can be very helpful in starting the journey. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely, perfectly, rightly answered. Also, like no, while you were talking about the sketch notes, the in the newspapers there was this column of visual that was created by Lakshman in the corner, which also depicted a lot of visual aspects. So it just reminded me of the same aspect while you were narrating this.
Yeah,
Okay.
drawing is a great example of drawing to initiate a social change.
Yeah.
And Lakshman's cartoons stay with us even years after, because they depicted or they documented that era in a way that even an uneducated person can understand. And that's the power of visual thinking, as I call it.
Absolutely. Okay, our next question is from Vinod. How to use right and left brain both?
Okay, I'm just putting the name of the book in the chat.
Sure.
Okay, so the question was, how do we balance the left and the right brain? I think it's very, very simple that we often feel like obviously we often block ourselves saying that I'm very logical as a person, so art is not really my thing. Or we say that I'm an artist, so what do I have to do with mathematics or logic or ideas or those kind of things? And I think the biggest barrier in using our heterogeneous brain or as I call it, being ambidextrous, which is the equal usage of logic and emotion. Like everything in life, there has to be a balance between the two. You can't be completely logical and have no emotions, and you can't be completely emotional without having any logic. So I think the first step towards that is to really unblock yourself and have a really open mind about it. And this is where this drawing exercise comes in place. We feel that drawing is a really right brain kind of creative activity, but it is not. Drawing is creative activity that helps you develop your logic. It helps you develop your thinking, and therefore it's a right brain activity that enables your left brain. And similarly, if you have a logical flow of ideas, but if you're not able to put it in a way that connects with others, then it's not going to be helpful. Therefore, you need to be able to be logical and be able to represent your logic in a creative way. And that's where the right brain helps the left brain and left brain helps the right brain. So it's, I think visual thinking nicely brings these two aspects of left right brain or ambidexterity in thinking by just putting your paper on the pen and giving a structure to your thoughts.
Beautifully answered. Um, that takes us to our next question from Tushar. What is the step-by-step method for developing this skill?
In one word, the answer is practice. Because if you want to learn bicycle, there is no step-by-step method. You just hop onto bicycle and start pedaling. You will fall down twice and get up third time, and you'll keep pedaling. And at one point, you will see that suddenly you're cruising along. And I think that is the step-by-step method that in creative endeavors like this, or in learning a new skill, the first thing is to overcome our own inertia of learning, and from there on, everything is gets easier.
Absolutely. And also it like reminds me sometime when we ourselves, while we are talking on the phone, we sometimes sketch whatever we keep discussing on the phone. We kind of scribble it on our papers. That's also one way of like creating your uh, visual thought process on the paper.
Yeah, and to add to what you just said, Peter, I think I realized that my answer was too generic. So let me give a specific ways to develop the skill. Number one is that when you are meeting your friends or people in a meeting room discussing an idea, see if you can take the lead, get up and start drawing something on the whiteboard. I think the risk of being judged is low because everybody knows you. They are your friends, they are your colleagues, and you can draw those things on a whiteboard. Um, when you want to communicate an idea, see if you can communicate it using a drawing. And then read the books that I have mentioned. There is a step-by-step method that they have provided to learn these skills. There are people who do workshops, and some of them are really open workshops that anybody can attend. That allows you to draw along the way and create this competency for yourself.
Absolutely. So our next question is from Deep. Somehow it's to the same earlier question that was asked: how to practice brain using both the sides. So I believe that has been answered, Deep.
Yeah.
Um, Coming to our next question thereafter from Sachin Kumar: how to use visual techniques in negotiation?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and I think I gave an example earlier in the uh, in the presentation that I think when you're negotiating, you can draw your current status in terms of what you think and what the other party thinks on the board, and then really start bringing those two aspects closer and closer and discuss what could bring us closer to this, right? So for example, in my case, I was trying to convince the client that they should buy our services using a presentation. They were not convinced. The guy just closed his eyes. And the moment I went on the whiteboard, a different kind of energy got into the room. And he started scribbling together and we started drawing together. And when you draw together, at some point there will be some alignment that you will be able to gain. So if you're negotiating with somebody, instead of negotiating straight out of your head, if you negotiate after putting your thoughts on a piece of paper and sharing that thinking. So let's say you are charging X amount for your services and you want to convince the customer that this is the right price. You can probably draw the value that the customer will get from your product. You can actually draw that value framework and show it to the customer and say, you know what, you're going to pay me X dollars and this is what you're going to get in return. These are all the things. And additionally, I'm going to also give you this and this. And you sort of draw that value diagram. It immediately becomes a point that the customer can connect with. So I think drawing is a very important, interesting technique that you can use for negotiation, sales, and influencing other people. And ultimately, negotiation is nothing but influencing other people. It's having more influence on the other person than the other person has on you to be able to win in that negotiation. So I think that it's a great tool that comes in handy. And I have first-hand experience of using it in sales kind of environment.
Absolutely. Being influential in sales definitely helps. Um, that takes us to our next question from Uma. How can we master this skill? Is there any other ways of learning more about this skill? I believe the books you mentioned.
Yes, so apart from I think the books are a great start. These books will expose you to the framework of thinking. However, there are a lot of communities online that help you. So there are a lot of sketch notes online. If you go to Pinterest, if you go to Twitter, there are sketch note communities, hashtag sketch notes. There are a lot of initiatives as well on Twitter, for example, where you can draw along with others. So there is a pass sketch note pass the sketch note kind of initiative where I draw a certain portion and then I pass it on to Peter will add his thoughts onto it, and therefore a sketch note is a combination of four different people thinking together on a piece of paper. I think it's very powerful. So there are a lot of online communities that you can use. There is a website called Sketchnote army.com. I've written it here. It is run by my friend Mauro Toselli. And they feature the sketch notes that amateurs like us have created, and they featured those sketch notes there. So you can actually see how people use the sketch notes to document their ideas and to do visual thinking.
Great. So we have questions that are flowing in. We'll take one last before we conclude with our questions. For the others, we can definitely have them answered via emails. Okay, so this last one is from Vanita. How visual thinking can help us in a day-to-day life? So what she meant would be in our daily activities.
But this is a very interesting question because I remember that when I was the country managing director for Basware in Chandigarh, and we had this appreciation program where there were cards, that were available with HR. I can pick a card, write my name, thank somebody, and give it to him or her. And what I used to do was I usually created these handwritten cards. It's again a very day-to-day life kind of a scenario, but having drawn a card on a blank piece of paper, having said thank you in a handwritten way with a small visual around, was amazing way of connecting with the person. It was received in a very heartfelt manner because it was hand drawn, even if it was rough, even if it was not that finished, but it was something that helped. In my own area, for example, I was discussing with my daughter in terms of how do we earn and save money and stuff like that. And I was teaching her the fundamental of simple interest. And from there, when I started drawing on a piece of paper that what simple interest means, and then we say that interest, you get interest when you invest your money, but you have to pay interest when you borrow money. And then it led to that whole conversation, where I think if I share that visual with you today, then you will get to know everything about personal finance, how to save, how to earn more, what is needed to be earning more, when is the best time to take a loan, how to repay, how to get debt free, and stuff like that. The whole thing really um, grew in the scope. And from a very simple topic like simple interest, we started talking about personal finance. And she is 14 years old, so this is the right time for her to understand the money mechanics. So in that sense, I think it was very helpful day-to-day exercise. I also play a lot of this Pictionary with my kids, where just like our Antakshari, right? I draw something, and then they take the last letter and they draw a certain thing. Or there is a wonderful game called Name, Place, Animal, and Thing, that you can play with your kids. It's not just fun, but it's also very educative, because you get to see how your kids perceive things in their mind, because they are drawing it as they are imagining it in their mind. And it's a very sort of interesting exercise that you could do overall. And I think apart from that, you can communicate your ideas using drawing and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of day-to-day application in how you can draw. I mean, if you go to an event where you are supposed to be putting your shoes outside before you enter the room, somebody can just draw a shoe there and hang it, and everybody will know that you have to remove the shoe. Nobody has written that remove the shoe here, but if you just draw a shoe there, everybody will remove their shoes. That's visual thinking. That's the connection that visuals have with people, and you can use it in day-to-day life in a very interesting way. So I think that's my short answer to that question.
Thank you so much, Tanmay.
And if you want to connect with my work, you can follow me on Twitter at tnvora. You can follow me on Instagram at tnvora. I do a lot of sharing on LinkedIn. My website is QAspire.com. This is where I share interesting ideas in visual form. You can subscribe to my blog as well, so when I post something, it gets to you in your email. And you can stay connected with me through my email address that I have mentioned here. These are all the ways to sort of connect. So thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience. Great question. I enjoyed being here and sharing whatever little I know about visual thinking.
Thank you so much, Tanmay, for sharing such wonderful insights on how one can script their entire thoughts to success and communicate through these visual presentations. It has been a pleasure being with you today. I'm sure our participants have benefited out of this enlightening session. Before we conclude with our today's session, we would also want to thank the association members, Geisha and NASCOM COE, for supporting these HRAI events. To know more about these associations, I request you to kindly visit the links provided in the chat window. Thank you once again, Tanmay, and our participants for joining us today. Do join us for our next masterclass tomorrow on change management, a way of life then and now, by Ms. Sandhya Puri on the 21st of Jan 2021. I request you to kindly register for this event in the link mentioned in the chat window. Also, do join the Dialogue 2021 WhatsApp chat group through the invite link shared in the chat window. That's it from us today. See you soon. Stay safe, take care, and bye for now. Dear participants, you all can share your details on the email ID that is shared in the group. It's team@hrassociationofindia.com. Thank you, Sham. We will now conclude with our today's session.